Can you hear me? It's a great pleasure for me to return to Korea, and it's really wonderful to see all of you here in the audience. My first visit to Korea was 27 years ago, and it was the result of your wonderful writing system, Hangul, the best writing system in the world with no close seconds. In my book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, I have a chapter on the development of writing. At that time, while doing research for my book, I did not know about Hangul, but I learned about it. And so in my book, I explained why Hangul is the world's best writing system. It's better than an alphabet. It's better than a syllabary. It's better than a system of logograms. What I wrote in Guns, Germs, Steel was read by a professor of linguistics here in Korea. And so she invited me in 1998 to come to a conference where, for the first time, I visited the land of Hangul. And that was the first of what have now been perhaps 8 visits to Korea. Each time that I've published one of my books in Korean translation, my publisher has brought me out to do publicity and to meet smiling people like you. But I also made a discovery about Korea, which probably most of you know, that you produce wonderful ceramics and pottery. My wife likes ceramics and pottery, and so on my previous trips, and yesterday, the day after my arrival in Korea, I spent the day in 2 Korean pottery shops buying this year's birthday present for my wife, and this year's Christmas present for my wife, and next year's birthday and Christmas and wedding anniversary presents for my wife, and also my presents for her for the year 2027, and my present for her for the year 2028. She does not know this yet, but she will receive all these presents of wonderful Korean pottery and ceramics when I return home. Alas, returning home tomorrow, because tomorrow is my birthday, and I will spend my birthday on the airplane, but then my wife will meet me at home to celebrate my birthday together. Now, the World Knowledge Forum gives me the opportunity to return to your remarkable country. My topic is an era of upheaval, the rise and fall of civilizations. But specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the consequences of globalization. Globalization is a new phenomenon in human history. Remember that for the first 3 million years of human history, every human or proto-human tribe dealt only with neighboring tribes, or else eventually with neighboring tribes in that part of the world. But now, for the first time, we face global problems requiring global solutions. For our first 3 million years of human and proto-human history, there was no fast mass travel or transport around the world. There was no travel or transport of people, nor of germs carried by people, nor of food, nor other products. We, our ancestors, traveled on land only by walking or by running. For 2 million years, for the first 2 million years of human history, we didn't travel over water at all. Until about 800,000 years ago, some primitive proto-humans in Indonesia, for the first time, became able to cross narrow bodies of water between Indonesian islands, probably at first just by swimming or by floating on tree trunks or on rafts. And then gradually those early humans learned to paddle logs or to paddle canoes that they made. But it wasn't until 5,000 years ago, very recently in the 3 million years of human history, not until 5,000 years ago, did we first improve on walking on land by riding horses. And then only within the last 200 years did we get something better than horses for land transport. Only within the last 200 years did we develop railroads and motor cars, finally making land transport faster than by horses or by walking. Also, it wasn't until 5,000 years ago that we improved on canoes paddled in the water by inventing sails. That happened evidently in the Mediterranean 5,000 years ago. And then only within the last 200 years did motor-driven ships make water transport faster than by swimming or paddling or sailing. So what this means is that fast and extensive travel is a very new phenomenon for us only in the last few thousand years or the last 200 years of our 3 million years of human history. As a result of our slow development of being able to move on land and on water, every human tribe for millions of years, and eventually every country for thousands of years, was concerned mostly just about its own individual problems. What today we call foreign policy used to mean being concerned about the problems only of immediately neighboring tribes or countries. You in Korea weren't concerned at all about what was happening in Argentina or in Iraq or in the Antarctic. We in the United States weren't concerned at all about what was happening in Somalia. But today, since the invention of airplanes, we do have fast transport around the world, transport of people and of germs carried by people and of food and other products. You Koreans are concerned now about Argentina and Iraq and the Antarctic for many reasons. You're concerned about Argentina because you Koreans are building nuclear reactors for Argentina. You are concerned about Iraq because Korea sent thousands of troops to Iraq in the year 2004. You in Korea are concerned about the Antarctic, the frozen Antarctic, because Korea is a signatory to the Antarctic Treaty to regulate the Antarctic continent. Similarly, the United States is concerned about Somalia now for many reasons, such as that Somali pirates with motorboats on the coast of Somalia venture hundreds of kilometers out into the Indian Ocean in order to attack ships. And we Americans are also concerned about Somalia because 100 American soldiers were killed or wounded in Somalia in 1993. All of this illustrates from the experience of you Koreans and of us Americans and every other people in the world. For the first time in human history now, we have global problems that require global solutions. We can date very precisely when globalization involving the whole world suddenly became a problem. Globalization became a problem that killed people just a little more than a century ago, And we can name the clock time. Globalization became a problem at 10:45 in the morning of the day of June 28 in the year 1914. That was the moment of the assassination in the southeastern European city of Sarajevo, the assassination of the hereditary prince of the Habsburg Empire, Franz Ferdinand, and his wife Sophie, by a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist. Of course, there had been assassinations before that did not result in world wars. But what was different on June 28th of the year 1914 is that now there were airplanes, and there were fast ships, and there were alliances, so that what happened in any country could affect other countries around the world. That assassination triggered the first real world war of human history. Naturally, the Habsburg Empire declared war on Serbia for a Serbian having killed the hereditary prince of the Habsburg Empire. Then Germany and other European allies of the Habsburgs also declared war on Serbia because Germany had an alliance with the Habsburgs. Thereupon, Russia mobilized its troops against Germany because Russia was allied with its Slavic brethren, the Serbs. Therefore, Germany declared war on France. Why? Because France and Russia were allies on opposite sides of Germany, and the Russian mobilization meant that if the French joined the war, Russia and France could squeeze Germany from two sides. So Germany declared war on France. When Germany declared war on France, Britain declared war on Germany. When Britain declared war on Germany, Canada and Australia and New Zealand were members of the British Commonwealth, and so Canada and Australia and New Zealand immediately also declared war on Germany, even though they lie 10,000 kilometers away over oceans. Britain confiscated 2 battleships that it was building for Turkey for the Ottoman Empire that Turkey had already paid for. So Turkey declared war on Britain, and Britain then staged an attack eventually on southeastern Arabia, far away from Britain, part of the Ottoman Empire. Italy declared war the next year on the Habsburg Empire. Japan and Australia seized the opportunity to attack German colonies halfway around the world, German colonies in the Pacific Ocean and a German holding in China. That brought Australia and Japan directly into the war, halfway around the world from Europe. But Britain took advantage of the occasion to attack the German colonies in Africa. The Germans secretly proposed to Mexico a treaty between Germany and Mexico, whereby Mexico, with the help of Germany, could regain Mexican holdings that had lost to the United States in 1848. Britain discovered that secret treaty, published it. The United States was angry, and eventually the United States declared war on Germany. So we now have a world war involving 5 of the 6 continents. This is World War I. The only continent that is not involved is South America. That First World War killed tens of millions of Europeans, Americans, Australians, Africans, and Japanese. I lived in Britain in the late 1950s and early 1960s. That was 44 years after the end of the First World War. But so many British people were killed in that First World War that the consequences of the war were vivid in England when I was living there in 1962. I was struck in Britain in 1962 by seeing so many British women in their 50s and 60s who were unmarried and who had never been married, and they were running businesses. They were managing hotels, and they were running other businesses that formerly British men had operated. Why? It was because that was the generation of British people, the generation of British women whose men had been killed in the First World War. That was the delayed consequences of that first globalized war, 44 years after its end. Even though tens of millions of people were killed in the First World War, nevertheless, on September 1 of 1939, 86 years ago last Monday, on September 1, 1939, Germany attacked Western Poland, starting what became the Second World War. At first, it was an attack just of Germany on Poland, but Britain and France had issued guarantees to Poland, and so Britain and France immediately declared war on Germany. Russia then invaded Poland from the east, and Russia also invaded Finland, and Russia occupied Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. After France and Britain had declared war on Germany, Italy eventually declared war on France, seen an opportunity to invade France, plus Italy had an army in North Africa which invaded British Egypt. Britain seized the opportunity to conquer the Italian colonies in East Africa, but Britain brought in 100,000 troops from India as soldiers to make that conquest possible. With the defeat of France by Germany, Japan occupied the French colonies in Southeast Asia, so the war has now spread from Europe to Asia, from Europe and Africa to Asia. Japan had already been fighting an undeclared, very bloody war against China, and Japan then declared war suddenly with 5 minutes' notice on the United States and on Australia and on Britain and invaded the Philippines. The United States then declared war upon Japan. So we now have 5 of the 6 inhabited countries of the world, 6 inhabited continents of the world involved in the World War. And the last continent, Brazil, then declared war on Germany, so that all 6 continents are involved in this war, a world war. The Second World War killed even more people than the First World War. The Second World War killed roughly 50 million people because of the enormous casualties, especially in China and in Russia and in Germany and in Japan and in the United States and in every other European country except Spain, Portugal, and Switzerland. Those then are examples of how globalization, made possible by airplanes and fast boats, has killed large numbers of people and created global problems. But globalization has done other things. In 1918, just at the end of the First World War, a pandemic, a worldwide epidemic of flu going around the world on boats and some on airplanes, killed tens of millions of people. All of you here know very well that beginning in 2019, in the year 2019, another worldwide pandemic, this time of COVID, again killed tens of millions of people. So, globalization, then, those world wars and those global epidemics that resulted from globalization should have taught everybody in the world a lesson that all countries now face, global challenges requiring us to join hands in finding global solutions. We've learned that lesson a little, but we haven't learned it nearly enough. What today, then, are the global challenges that we face? What are the global challenges that are going to affect, that are already affecting the lives of every one of you here today? I'll mention four global challenges, what I think are the four biggest global challenges. One global challenge, of course, I'm sure that it's the first one that you thought of, is the likelihood of another pandemic like the 2019 COVID pandemic and the 1918 flu pandemic. You remember that in the Middle Ages in Europe, the Black Death killed 1/3 of Europe's population because Europeans were not exposed to plague, whereas Asians were already exposed to plague. The first time that I met the famous Bill Gates and I had a conversation. With me, he was friendly, a thoughtful person. Bill Gates said, "Jared, I know that you're concerned about environmental problems. Maybe you're right, but Bill Gates, I'm more concerned about emerging diseases, about pandemics, and their potential for killing many people." Well, I regard that global challenge as the least dangerous of the four big global challenges that we now face. And I say that because the worst that another pandemic is likely to do is again to kill tens of millions of people, as did the 1918 flu, or as did the 2019 COVID epidemic. But another pandemic, at most, it might kill a few tens of millions of people again, but it's not going to threaten the survival of the world's remaining 9 billion people. And so I rate an emerging disease, another pandemic, as, yes, a global problem, but as the least important of the four global problems that I'll discuss with you. The second global challenge is much more serious. It's, of course, global climate change. Last year was the hottest year in world history, in recorded world history. The temperature reached 50 degrees centigrade every day for a month in the American city of Phoenix. And for that month, the temperature in Phoenix never dropped below 45 degrees centigrade. It reached 45 degrees centigrade at 6 a.m. in the morning, the coldest time of the day, but then it rose back to 50 degrees centigrade. Temperatures of over 50 degrees centigrade were reached elsewhere in the world, but global temperatures are expected to keep rising even higher in coming years because of our burning of fossil fuels, which release into the atmosphere the gas carbon dioxide, which is the main cause of global warming. Well, could you Koreans protect yourself against global warming and against rising temperatures over Korea by burning less fossil fuel in Korea? Similarly, could we Americans, could we in the USA protect ourselves against rising temperatures so it won't get to 50 degrees every night in Phoenix just by burning less fossil fuel in the USA? No, of course, that's not going to solve the problem for either you in Korea or for us in the USA, because the atmosphere around the world is mixed by the wind. The carbon dioxide over Korea doesn't mostly come from the fossil fuels that you burn. The carbon dioxide over Korea results from fossil fuels burned in China and burned all over the world. So there's nothing that you Koreans alone can do to protect yourself against global warming. Rising temperatures are a global problem that require a global solution, reducing the burning of fossil fuels everywhere in the world, especially by reducing the burning of fossil fuels in the world's 5 biggest burners of fossil fuels, namely the United States, China, Japan, India, and the European Union. Globally, rising temperatures kill some people directly. There were people who fell down dead in the streets of Phoenix, or who burnt their feet on the streets of Phoenix. But globally rising temperatures don't kill 50 million people only directly, as do pandemics. Instead, global warming kills people in indirect ways and thereby threatens the survival of civilization. That's because global warming kills people in several indirect ways. Global warming permits the spread of mosquitoes and other vectors that carry tropical diseases from the tropics into the temperate zones as it gets warmer in the temperate zones. So that what used to be regarded as tropical diseases, malaria, yellow fever, dengue fever, you couldn't get in Korea. You only got them traveling to Africa or South America. But increasingly now, these tropical diseases are spreading to the temperate zones, including to the United States. A tropical disease called chikungunya fever. Chikungunya fever is a disease in East Africa, Uganda. Nobody ever heard of it in Europe until cases of chikungunya fever began cropping up in Italy, in Europe. Why? Because the vectors, the insects that carry chikungunya fever, are tropical insects, but as it got warmer too in Europe, the vectors carrying chikungunya fever spread to Italy and brought chikungunya fever there and began killing people in Europe. Global warming also kills people indirectly by reducing food production. You might think warmer temperatures are wonderful. Warmer temperatures mean more growth of crops, more rice, more wheat. But unfortunately, rising temperatures also mean more growth of weeds. And it turns out that warmer temperatures make weeds grow faster than they make crops grow faster. So the net result of global warming is less food production rather than more food production. And then still another way in which rising temperatures kill people indirectly is by destroying the coral reefs that protect tropical coastlines. Coral reefs all around the world are being destroyed by acidification of the oceans, lower pH values caused by carbon dioxide dissolving in the oceans, damaging coral reefs. But coral reefs are the protection of tropical coastlines against tsunamis. And so in 2004, there was a big tsunami in the Indian Ocean, which killed 234,000 people, especially on the Indonesian island of Sumatra, but also in Thailand and Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Why? Because the coral reefs that had formerly protected these coastlines were being damaged by global warming. So there are two global challenges that threaten us: pandemics and global warming. The third, the next to last global challenge that I'll mention is the global depletion of fish. And as I'll explain, this is something that particularly concerns you Koreans. Fish are what are called a renewable resource, meaning that fish renew themselves. Adult fish produce baby fish. Coal and iron are not renewable resources. Coal does not produce baby coal, and iron does not produce baby iron, but adult fish give birth to baby fish. And therefore, if you catch fish, initially that tends to reduce the number of fish, but the remaining adult fish produce baby fish. And even if you're catching fish, the fish population can remain constant, and you can keep on catching fish forever, provided that you catch adult fish at a rate lower than the rate at which the remaining adult fish produce baby fish. There are some fisheries within national boundaries, fisheries confined to within a nation's waters, such as the Alaska salmon fishery in the United States. within the state of Alaska and its waters. Alaska salmon are exploited sustainably by the fishing fleets of the United States because US government scientists figure out the sustainable catch rate of salmon, and American fishermen are permitted to catch fish only within that limit that has been determined to be sustainable. There are other fisheries around the world within national waters that are again sustainable because government scientists of that nation figured out the sustainable catch rate and limit fishermen to catching those fish at a sustainable rate. The Australian rock lobster fishery is well managed and sustainable. The herring fishery of the River Thames that flows through London and Britain operates sustainably because it's within national waters. But the open ocean doesn't belong to any nation. No national government can limit catch rates in the open ocean. And so fishermen of any nation can catch fish anywhere on the open ocean in any quantity that they want. The world's largest fishing fleets are those of China, the United States, the European Union, and Japan. But those four countries haven't reached a global agreement about catching fish in the open ocean. Instead, each of those four fleets catches as many ocean fish as they can, reasoning that if our fleet doesn't catch those fish, the Chinese or the European or the Japanese fleet will catch those fish. The result is that many fisheries, actually most fisheries in the open ocean, are overfished, meaning that fish are being or were caught faster than the fish could reproduce, and so the fishery has declined or collapsed. An example, what used to be the world's most valuable productive fishery was the Peruvian fishery for anchovies, small fish like sardines. Anchovies were incredibly prolific in the nutrient-rich waters of the Humboldt Current off the coast of Peru. And for years, once the Peruvian government, about 50 years ago, began permitting the fishing of anchovies, Peruvian anchovies were caught at the rate of 14 million tons per year, by far the world's largest fishery. But the Peruvian anchovy, it was studied carefully by Peruvian scientists who wanted to maintain that fishery. Nevertheless, the Peruvian anchovy fishery declined. The catch fell from 14 million tons to only 4 million tons per year for two reasons. One, it's complicated for scientists to figure out the maximum sustainable catch rate in an area like the Humboldt Current that varies and the temperature is warmer some years than other years. And the other reason was that Peruvian fishermen didn't like to hear government scientists tell them you can catch fewer fish this year. And so Peruvian fishermen complained, and the government often listened to the fishermen and not to the scientists. The result was the collapse of the world's biggest and most valuable fishery. Another fishery that declined steeply. You undoubtedly know that Mediterranean bluefin tuna is now the world's single most valuable fish. Mediterranean bluefin tuna are prized in Japan for sushi and for sashimi. One big Mediterranean bluefin tuna one fish sells on the Tokyo fish market for up to €1 million. That's what, 1.5 billion won. But the Mediterranean bluefin tuna gathers in swarms in the Mediterranean to spawn, and those swarms can be identified by airplanes, and then fishing boats of Japan and other nations move in to catch the bluefin tuna. So the tuna fishery declined by 70%. It's now increased somewhat, but it's still below its peak. When I was Growing up as a child on the east coast of the United States, the fish that we ate most often were Atlantic swordfish and a fish called mackerel, a very tasty black and white fish. Mackerel is still beloved in Japan, but even though I spend parts of my summers, my wife and I, every year near Boston, I have not seen a mackerel in Boston fish markets for decades. It used to be our commonest fish. Why? Because mackerel was overfished. And Atlantic swordfish have been overfished. They are now commercially extinct. Yes, you can still eat swordfish, but those swordfish now come from the Pacific Ocean rather than from the Atlantic Ocean. That problem of overfishing in the oceans is not going to be solved until there's a global agreement between fishing nations about fish catches. And we don't yet have such a global agreement. The fourth and the last global challenge is the one that you've been waiting to hear about. It's the obvious big one, the risk of nuclear war. 9 countries are known already to possess nuclear weapons. Those are the United States, Russia, China, Britain, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea. Iran is known to be developing nuclear weapons. South Africa had a nuclear weapon program that it discontinued. A nuclear attack of one country by another, of one country on another country that also has nuclear weapons, would kill lots of citizens, not just by the attacking country, but by the other country. And the reason is that ever since Russia, in addition to the United States, developed nuclear weapons, we Americans, I remember when I was a teenager in the 1950s, we were afraid about a preemptive attack by Russia. And so the United States, and now Russia and China and Israel and Britain and so on, every country with nuclear weapons hides some of its nuclear weapons so that if another country with nuclear weapons made a first attack, the attacked country would still have weapons to launch a retaliatory counterattack and to wipe out the country that made the attack. For example, we Americans, it is well known and reported, we Americans store some of our nuclear weapons in deep silos that could not be destroyed by an attack. We have other nuclear weapons carried constantly around the world in nuclear submarines. We had or have a fleet of bombers, big bombers, carrying nuclear weapons, and of those bombers, 1/3 of them are always in the air. So even if Russia or China or North Korea launched an attack that destroyed every American city, there would still be those bombers up in the air carrying nuclear weapons that would destroy the country that had launched the attack. We now know that an exchange of nuclear weapons between 2 countries wouldn't just kill lots of citizens of those 2 countries. It would also kill lots of people everywhere and possibly extinguish life on Earth by injecting dust into the atmosphere, darkening the sky, preventing photosynthesis, and causing global cooling, the opposite of global warming. That was apparently what happened 69 million years ago when a big asteroid crashed into the Earth in the Gulf of Mexico, driving up enormous clouds of dust that darkened the sky, stopped photosynthesis for years, and the dinosaurs and every other vertebrate weighing more than 40 kilograms went extinct. That nuclear winter caused by an asteroid is a model for what an exchange of nuclear weapons today would do. So an attack by, let's say, suppose Pakistan attacked India. That would immediately kill lots of Indians. But India, even if its cities were wiped out, would use its hidden nuclear weapons to launch a retaliatory attack that would kill lots of Pakistanis. And the resulting nuclear winter from all of those atomic bombs blowing up dust into the air would kill lots of people around the world, maybe everybody, everywhere else around the world. So what can we do about it? Nowadays, today, it's in the interest of every country with nuclear weapons not to use those nuclear weapons, because any country that used its nuclear weapons would then get wiped out on the next day by a retaliatory attack. That's the obvious reason why there has never been another use of nuclear weapons since the year 1945, not even by North Korea. Every country with nuclear weapons knows that if it uses them, it's going to get wiped out the next day by a retaliatory attack. There have been agreements reached and carried out between Russia and the United States for both Russia and the United States to reduce their stockpiles of nuclear weapons, because we both recognize that excess nuclear weapons do neither of us any good. What we need now is a similar global agreement between every nuclear-armed country to reduce their stockpiles and not to use their stockpiles. Is that impossible? You might say. There's no way that every country with nuclear weapons is going to agree not to use those nuclear weapons. But just think what has happened in the last 80 years since 1945. All nuclear-armed countries, in effect, have already made an agreement. It's not a spoken agreement and it's not a written agreement, but it's an agreement that every country, including North Korea, has adopted since 1945 not to use its nuclear weapons, because every country knows that if it did, it's going to get wiped out. There has been progress on global agreements about food, about pandemics. If we can reach global agreements about not just pandemics, but about climate change and fishing, that would make a signed global agreement, not just an unspoken one like we have now, but a written signed global agreement about nuclear weapons, a natural next step. Well, I've talked now for 45 minutes about things that may make you worried and pessimistic. Let me conclude in the last 5 minutes with reasons why you should be optimistic. Not cheerfully optimistic, tra-la-la, there's nothing to worry about, but cautiously optimistic. In the last 80 years, we have already made major global agreements, not yet about climate change, but about other things. In 1977, the countries of the world made an agreement to eliminate the worst disease of human history, smallpox, the disease that's killed more people than any other disease. Eliminating smallpox was difficult. The last cases of smallpox were in a remote part of Somalia. And boy, it is difficult to send public health officials into Somalia. But it was done, and the last case of wild smallpox outside of laboratories was in 1977, a successful global agreement. We cooperated to eliminate the worst animal disease, rinderpest, the animal disease, rinderpest that killed more farm animals, cattle and sheep, in Asia and Europe and Africa than any other disease. Rinderpest was eliminated by a global agreement in the year 2001. Chlorofluorocarbons. I suspect that my guess is that every one of you here is too young to remember this, because I was born in 1937. I do remember this. Refrigerators. Today you're not worried about refrigerators. You don't think of refrigerators as poisonous. But when I was a child, the gases of refrigerators were poisonous. And so the last thing that my father did, and every parent around the world did before going to bed at night, was checking your refrigerator to make sure that the refrigerator wasn't leaking. Because if the refrigerator did leak, refrigerant gases were poisonous, and you would all wake up dead the next morning, or you wouldn't wake up at all. But then in the 1940s, new refrigerant gases, chlorofluorocarbons, were developed by chemists, and they were not poisonous. And tests in the laboratory showed no harmful effects in the laboratory. So that was wonderful. Refrigerators got filled with chlorofluorocarbons, but unfortunately it was then discovered that chlorofluorocarbons destroy the ozone layer that protects the world against ultraviolet. And so it was proposed to phase out chlorofluorocarbons. The chemical companies of the world kicked and screamed and said, no, chlorofluorocarbons are perfectly safe. Laboratory tests have showed it. We don't want to lose money by stopping producing chlorofluorocarbons. There was a big argument, but the end of the big argument was the world reached an agreement to eliminate chlorofluorocarbons. The world reached an agreement to eliminate single-hulled oil tankers on the seas. Oil tankers with one hull on the high seas. If that one hull gets pierced, oil leaks out, and so an agreement was reached, the so-called MARPOL agreement in 2003, that all oil companies on the high seas, or all oil tankers on the high seas, have to have two hulls. That was a world agreement. And another world agreement, very difficult, was that every country that has a seacoast has an exclusive economic zone. That's true of Korea, true of Japan, true of China. In 1982, an agreement was reached where neighboring countries have neighboring economic zones. There were arguments. Where's the boundary? In 1982, finally, all countries of the world signed an agreement to delineate coastal economic zones around the world. And finally, we're working now to eliminate the disease polio. We've eliminated it in all countries except Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it's just a matter of time before we get a global agreement that eliminates polio. In short, I'll end this seemingly pessimistic talk on an optimistic note. We've achieved global solutions to global problems. We have a track record of success. It's always difficult because it requires an agreement among the 216 countries of the world, including North Korea and Afghanistan and all the others. But in many cases, it has already proved possible. That's why I'm cautiously optimistic that we could also succeed in solving the four major global challenges that I've discussed this afternoon, provided that we recognize that we have to solve them. Thank you for your attention, and thank you so much for bringing me back to Korea, land of Hangul and great ceramic pottery. Thank you.